You've seen the Titanic movies. You know the ship. You know the disaster. But you were never told about him. Tonight, Silent Chains breaks that silence. In the early hours of April 15th, 1912, the Atlantic Ocean was silent again. The screams had faded. The cries for help had been swallowed by distance, cold, and darkness. What remained was floating wreckage and memory. Over 1,500 people died that night. Their names were printed in newspapers. Their faces were mourned. Their stories were told, retold, dramatized, and immortalized. But one man disappeared twice. First, into the freezing water of the North Atlantic, and then into history itself. No statue was built for him. No film centered on his life. No chapter in school books spoke his name, because history, like the world he lived in, decided he was easier to forget. His name was Joseph Philippe Laroche, and before the Titanic ever sank, his life had already been shaped by silence. A world divided before the ship. To understand Joseph Laroche, you must first understand the world that existed before the Titanic. The early 1900s were not an equal world. They were not a fair world. They were not a forgiving world. Race decided your future long before talent ever could. Your skin color could open doors or quietly lock them forever. Europe called itself civilized, educated, advanced, but for black men, even the most educated ones, opportunity had invisible borders. Joseph Laroche would spend his entire life pushing against those borders. Born into Expectation, Haiti, 1886. Joseph was born on May 26, 1886, in Cap Haitian, a coastal city in northern Haiti. Haiti was not just any nation. It was the first black republic in the world, born from a slave revolution that terrified colonial powers. But by the late 1800s, Haiti was struggling. Political instability, economic pressure, foreign interference. Yet Joseph's family stood apart from the chaos. His father, Jean-Joseph Laroche, had served in the Haitian military and maintained connections within the government. His mother, Marie Laroche, was educated, disciplined, and fiercely protective of her children's future. Their home was not rich, but it was structured. Books mattered, education mattered, discipline mattered. From a young age, Joseph showed signs of unusual focus. While other children played in the dusty streets, Joseph asked questions. Why does iron bend when heated? Why do machines break? Why do ships move faster with steam? He watched the harbor endlessly. Ships were coming and going, symbols of escape, power, and progress. Joseph didn't dream of being famous. He dreamed of understanding how the world worked. His mother noticed something important. Katie could not give her son what his mind demanded, and so she made a painful decision. A child sent away in 1901, when Joseph was just 15 years old, his mother arranged for him to be sent to France. There was no ceremony, no celebration, just a long journey and a quiet goodbye. Joseph boarded a steamship with a small suitcase, a few closed letters of recommendation, expectations heavier than his luggage. As the ship pulled away from the Haitian coast, Joseph stood alone on deck. The island faded into the horizon. He did not know it then, but he would never truly return to the life he was leaving behind. France, education without belonging. France welcomed ideas. It welcomed ambition. It welcomed progress. But it did not welcome him. Joseph enrolled in engineering studies, eventually attending institutions that focused on mechanical and civil engineering. The work was brutal. Advanced mathematics, technical drafting, physics that demanded perfection. Joseph worked harder than his classmates, not because he was weaker, but because failure would confirm what many already believed about him. He was often the only black student in his classes. The stares were constant, the isolation quiet but heavy. Professors spoke to him formally, never warmly. Classmates rarely included him. Yet Joseph endured. Night after night, he studied. Ink-stained fingers, tired eyes, a mind refusing to quit. When he graduated, he did so with honor and skill. On paper, Joseph Laroche was exactly what Europe claimed to admire: educated, trained, intelligent, disciplined. Reality would prove otherwise. The wall after the degree with diploma in hand, Joseph searched for work. Engineering firms, public works offices, industrial companies. He sent letters, made visits, waited and waited. The replies, when they came, were polite. "We regret to inform you. No positions available. Your qualifications are impressive, however." White classmates with weaker records were hired quickly. Joseph was offered only temporary or inferior positions. Low pay, no advancement, no recognition. This was racism without shouting, racism without insults, racism wrapped in silence. It was devastating. Joseph had done everything right, and still the door remained closed. Love in a hostile society, in a world that refused him dignity. Joseph found something unexpected. Love. He met Juliette Marie-Louise Lafargue, a young French woman from a respectable family. She was white. He was black. In early 1900s France, this was not just uncommon, it was dangerous. Their relationship drew attention. Disapproval. Whispers. Cold looks. But Juliette saw Joseph's heart, not his skin. She admired his intelligence, his calm strength, his patience. They married in 1908. For a brief moment, Joseph believed life was turning. They built a quiet life together. 2 daughters were born. Simon and Louise's happiness was fragile. Louise was often sick. Medical bills grew. Joseph's career remained stagnant. Then Juliette became pregnant again. Hope and fear arrived together. A decision for survival. Joseph knew something had to change. France was suffocating him. No matter how educated he was, no matter how skilled, he would never truly be accepted. Haiti, however, was different. There, his education mattered. There, his race would not limit him. There, his children could grow without shame. Joseph decided to return home. His mother helped arrange passage. Tickets were booked on a French liner. But then a small rule changed everything. Children were not allowed to dine with parents in certain ship classes. Joseph refused to be separated from his daughters, so he exchanged the tickets. The new ship was newer, larger, more luxurious. It was called RMS Titanic. Foreshadowing without knowing, Joseph did not know he had just stepped into history. To him, it was simply transportation, a bridge between struggle and hope. He packed their belongings carefully. Clothes. Documents. Dreams. On April 10, 1912, the Laroche family boarded the Titanic in France. Bound for a new life, Joseph stood on deck, holding one of his daughters. The ship moved slowly at first, massive, confident, unapologetic. Behind him was Europe. Ahead of him was Haiti. And beneath him was a ship the world believed could never sink. April 10, 1912. The port of Cherbourg, France, was alive with anticipation. The RMS Titanic, the largest ship ever built, loomed over the harbor. Its gleaming white hull reflected the early morning sun. Passengers bustled across the gangways, some carrying luggage, others carrying dreams. The air was filled with excitement, laughter, and the faint scent of coal smoke. Amidst this, Joseph Laroche held the hands of his young daughters, Simone and Louise, while keeping a firm grip on the wrist of his wife, Juliette. Each of them carried their own mix of excitement and trepidation, but Joseph's mind was elsewhere. This was not just a voyage. This was a chance for survival, a chance for dignity, a chance to rewrite the narrative that life had long dictated for him. First impressions of the Titanic. The Titanic was more than a ship, it was a city floating on water. The grand staircase glimmered under crystal chandeliers. Mahogany panels reflected the soft glow of morning light. Passengers in fine clothes moved like ants in a carefully designed colony. Joseph marveled at the scale and elegance. Engineers, he knew, had to be meticulous to create such perfection. He admired the work, the precision, the ambition. Yet, while others saw luxury and opulence, Joseph also saw hierarchy. The ship was divided in more than just decks. It was divided by class, status, and even race. The Laroche family had first-class accommodations not because of wealth, but because tickets were exchanged for comfort and safety. Despite this, Joseph remained conscious of the stares that followed in. Some passengers whispered, some avoided eye contact, some simply stared. Even in luxury, silence could be cruel. The family settles in Laroche family's cabin was modest by Titanic standards, but luxurious compared to most ships afloat. A bed for the children, a writing desk for Joseph, a small wardrobe, and a private bathroom. Joseph spent hours organizing the cabin, not just for comfort, but for control. For someone who had spent his life pushing against invisible barriers, order was a way to survive. Juliet tried to lighten the mood, unpacking small toys for the children and setting a vase of fresh flowers on the desk. Simone and Louise ran around, giggling as they explored the small space, unaware of the gravity that would soon shadow their journey. But Joseph could not entirely relax. He observed the crew, noted the ship's structure, and even asked subtle questions about safety protocols. Though the Titanic was advertised as unsinkable, Joseph's mind, trained in reason and observation, quietly asked questions that no one else thought to ask. The ship departs by late morning. The Titanic began its journey toward the open sea. Families waved from the docks. Flags fluttered. Steam hissed. The Laroche family stood together on the deck. Joseph's hand rested on Juliet's shoulder. This is it, he thought. A new beginning? For a brief moment, the Atlantic seemed endless and forgiving. Below deck, third-class passengers were crowded together, their lives less privileged but no less hopeful. They laughed, sang, and shared stories. Joseph observed them from above, silently noting the differences. The vastness of the ocean mirrored the vastness of human society. Some had room, some had wealth, some had privilege, some had nothing but hope. Joseph knew all too well which group he had been born into, and yet here he was finally, physically, and socially above the barriers, encountering luxury and strangers. Over the next few days, the Laroche family began to settle into life aboard the Titanic. Meals were served in the grand dining room. Crystal glasses sparkled in the morning light. Waiters in pristine uniforms glided silently between tables. Joseph watched. He studied. He learned. Other passengers noticed him, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with thinly veiled suspicion. Many had never seen a black man in first class, let alone one with a family. A few were polite. A few pretended not to see in. A few whispered in French and English. Joseph had learned a long time ago that silence could be weaponized. He had also learned that dignity required ignoring it. During dinner, he spoke softly to Juliet about the children, about the future, about the possibility of a life where the world judged by skill and character, not skin. He smiled at the children when they laughed. He calmed them when they feared the ocean. He explained the mechanisms of the ship to them, teaching them as he had been taught. The silence of the night on April 11th, the first night at sea, Joseph could not sleep. The ship was quiet. Most passengers rested. The crew moved efficiently, but unobtrusively. Joseph leaned on the railing, staring at the endless dark water below. Stars mirrored on the ocean's surface, infinite and indifferent. He thought of Haiti, of his parents, of the opportunities he had lost, of the ones he hoped to give his children. He thought of the ocean itself, calm and silent, and felt the fragile line between human ambition and nature's power. History had shown him that life was often unkind, that brilliance and skill did not guarantee safety, that luck could turn in a moment. And yet, he hoped. Silently, Joseph made a promise. No matter what happened, he would protect his family. The passengers and their story as Titanic carried many stories, many lives, many secrets. The Laroche family brushed against all of them in the corridors. There was the wealthy American businessman, arrogant but polite, who offered a nod to Joseph in passing. The young English couple, fascinated by the ship's machinery, Who asked Joseph questions about the engines? The elderly French aristocrat, critical of the children running through the hallways, but ultimately tolerant. Joseph noticed patterns. Those who ignored him rarely intended harm. Those who stared usually feared difference. The lessons were familiar. Humans are creatures of habit, prejudice, and fascination. Even aboard a floating palace, inequality persisted. Joseph did not complain. He adapted. He survived. The engineer's eye, unlike most passengers, Joseph could not help himself from studying the ship. He traced the walls of the grand staircase. He examined the mechanical compartments below. He watched the engineers coordinate the engines, listening to the rhythm of pistons, steam, and valves. He recognized quality. He recognized skill. He recognized danger. The Titanic was impressive, yes, but perfection was an illusion. He made mental notes. Safety precautions, weak points, escape routes, all in silence, all without alarming anyone. This was Joseph Laroche, the silent observer. Always learning, always calculating, always preparing. A family moment of joy despite the tension. There were moments of joy. On April 12th, the Laroche family took a stroll along the deck. The sun was bright, the air crisp. Simone and Louise chased each other, laughing as Joseph pretended to be a giant catching them. Juliet held Joseph's arm, leaning into his shoulder as the ocean stretched endlessly. For a moment, there was no prejudice, no hardship, no history, only family, only love, only hope. These moments, Joseph knew, would be the ones they clung to whatever came next. The unseen danger. No one aboard Titanic could see it yet. No one could anticipate the iceberg that would appear silently in the North Atlantic. Joseph studied charts, asked questions about ice warnings, and noticed the increasing messages from nearby ships. The crew discussed it quietly. The passengers barely noticed. He made mental notes, silently aware of the fragility of the human endeavor. This was a voyage of hope, but it was also a voyage on a thin line between survival and disaster. Joseph's awareness was his armor. His silence was his strength. The morning of April 14, 1912 began like any other aboard the Titanic. The sun rose pale over the icy Atlantic. A crisp wind blew over the deck, carrying with it the briny scent of the open sea. Passengers lingered outside, enjoying the warmth that the early spring day offered, oblivious to the danger that approached silently through the cold waters. Joseph Laroche, however, was not oblivious. The foreboding signs from his position near the railing, Joseph observed the horizon. Icebergs had been sighted along the northern routes for weeks. Messages and warnings had come from nearby vessels. While the crew of the Titanic acknowledged them, there was a complacency that Joseph had learned to recognize long ago, a dangerous combination of hubris and overconfidence. He watched the horizon carefully, noting the glints of light on distant, jagged shapes that could have been ice. He did not speak aloud. No one had to know. Awareness was often more useful than alarm. Juliet noticed his furrowed brow. "Joseph," she said softly, "what worries you?" "Nothing," he replied. Yet, in his eyes was a seriousness she had never seen. He had survived prejudice, displacement, and the unknown. This was just another challenge. The children, unaware, played along the deck, their laughter carried by the wind. Joseph's mind, however, was focused. He mapped escape routes, studied lifeboat locations, and memorized the fastest paths from their cabin to safety. Every second could matter. Every choice could determine life or death. The collision. By late evening, the Titanic was sailing faster than what would later be deemed safe in icy waters. At 11:40 p.m., the lookout shouted, "Iceberg! Right ahead!" Time slowed. Joseph's instincts, honed over years of survival, kicked in. He gripped Juliet's hand tightly and pulled her from the crowd on deck, shielding the children behind him. The collision was subtle at first, a grinding, metallic shudder that rippled through the immense ship. Passengers gasped. Some laughed nervously, thinking it a minor bump. Others, sensing danger, began to panic. Joseph did not panic. Panic was a luxury for those unprepared. He guided Juliet and the children toward their cabin, keeping low, keeping silent. Every footstep, every breath measured. He knew chaos could be more dangerous than the iceberg itself. The realization of danger, the shuddering stopped. Then came the silence. Joseph listened carefully. Water was entering compartments. The hull had been breached. Titanic's unsinkable legend was already being tested. Crew members moved quickly, issuing orders. Many passengers did not yet comprehend the severity. Some remained in their cabins. Some continued to explore, seeking reassurance that everything was normal. Joseph, however, made a decision. They would not wait. They would act. He gathered Juliet and the children and moved toward the nearest lifeboat station. Chaos on deck. By now, panic had begun to spread. First-class passengers, despite their privilege, were not immune. Elegant gowns and tuxedos became cumbersome. Children cried. Men shouted orders that were never heard. The crew tried to maintain order, but fear is contagious. Even trained sailors found themselves struggling against human panic. Joseph pushed forward, silent but resolute. He kept Juliet close, held the children even closer. He whispered instructions in French, guiding them to remain calm. Other passengers noticed him. Some moved aside respectfully. Some stared, curious. A black man calmly guiding his family through impending disaster. Most had never witnessed such poise. The lifeboats, boats were being lowered. Joseph observed carefully which boats were full, which were empty, which crew members were prioritizing safety over protocol. He realized the harsh truth. Not everyone would survive. He pushed Juliet and the children toward a boat that still had space. A few hesitant first-class passengers tried to cut ahead. Joseph's quiet authority, coupled with the resolve in his eyes, prevented them. There would be no negotiation here. Safety first, for his family. As they descended into the lifeboat, Joseph helped the children sit safely, then lifted Juliet in, ensuring she was secure. He remained standing, scanning the deck. The selfless choice. Since the family was seated, Joseph faced a choice. Lifeboats were limited. The crew insisted that men remain behind to increase women and children's survival chances. Joseph nodded, understanding the unspoken rule. He kissed Juliet's hand softly, whispered promises he hoped to keep. He turned back toward the chaotic deck. The ship groaned. Water surged through the lower decks. Coal seeped into every corner. Joseph moved with purpose, helping those who were frozen in fear. He guided passengers toward boats. He reassured the crew. Every action precise, every word measured. The silence of heroism. There were no fanfares. No cameras captured his movements. No one would write his name in bold headlines that morning. He acted quietly, efficiently, humanely. Heroism, Joseph understood, did not require applause. As the Titanic tilted and the waters reached higher decks, Joseph's presence became a pillar of hope for those around him. The final moments. 2:20 a.m. Titanic had begun her final plunge. Ice-cold water surged, lifeboats floated amidst debris, and the night sky seemed darker than ever. Joseph, standing on the deck, scanned for his family's boat. He saw Juliet and the children huddled together, safe for now. Relief was brief. Survival was still uncertain. He helped a few more passengers, then found a spot to hold onto a railing. The ship's immense size was now a death trap. Its grandeur, a cruel reminder of human hubris. The ocean's silence had become deafening. Aftermath. On the water, hours passed. Survivors in lifeboats shivered in the freezing Atlantic. The Titanic was gone beneath the waves. Joseph's family, despite the terror, had survived. He rode, guided, and comforted them through the night. No one spoke much. Words seemed inadequate. Silence dominated. But in that silence, there was gratitude, resilience, and the unspoken understanding of the fragility of life. The legacy begins. Joseph Laroche would never speak publicly about the Titanic for 83 years. The memory was too raw, too private, too monumental. Yet, his choices That night the calm, the observation, the quiet courage saved lives, not just of his family, but of those who followed his lead in the chaos. The world would remember Titanic as a disaster, a story of pride and tragedy. But Joseph's story's silent, heroic, extraordinary would remain almost entirely untold, until decades later, when history demanded it. The years after the Titanic disaster were marked by quiet perseverance for Joseph Laroche. He returned to France with Juliet and the children, carrying the weight of survival in a world that often ignored the extraordinary courage of a black man who had faced death on one of the most famous ships in history. A life rebuilt. Life did not immediately return to normal. The media reported on Titanic, focusing largely on first-class tragedies and heroic actions of European men. Joseph's story, a black passenger, a man who had guided his family through chaos, was largely invisible. In the crowded streets of Paris, Joseph found work as an engineer. He spoke little of the ocean, the collision, or the frozen silence of that night. Each mention brought waves of memory he was unwilling to confront publicly. Juliet, ever supportive, understood. She never pushed him to speak. Their children grew up with the stories of courage they could feel but not fully understand. Joseph's friends and acquaintances noted a quiet strength, a presence that suggested he had lived through more than ordinary men could imagine. But specifics remained elusive. The burden of silence for decades. Joseph remained silent about the Titanic. This was not shame, nor fear of disbelief. It was a profound understanding of the weight of memory. He knew the world of 1912 was different. Racism was pervasive, opportunities for black men were limited, and the extraordinary acts of people like him often went unrecognized or were erased entirely. Speaking out could invite scrutiny, skepticism, or worse. So, he kept his story hidden. Inside, however, the memory of that night, the screams, the cold, the groaning of the ship remained vivid. It haunted his dreams. Each time he closed his eyes, he relived the collision, the chaos on deck, and the sight of the lifeboats drifting away under the pale light of the stars. Yet in silence, he also carried pride. He had saved his family. He had acted with courage. He had survived when so many others had not. A world changes as decades passed. History moved on. Titanic became legend, mythologized in books, exhibitions, and films. The focus remained on grandeur, tragedy, and heroism, but rarely on the experiences of black passengers. Joseph watched quietly from the sidelines, aware that one day the truth might matter not just for himself, but for the generations that followed. The decision to speak took 83 years before Joseph broke the silence. By this time, he was an elderly man, aware that mortality was pressing close. The world had changed in ways unimaginable in 1912. Civil rights movements, global wars, technological revolutions, he had witnessed them all. He realized that if he did not tell his story, it might never be heard. The decision was difficult. Speaking meant reliving pain, but it also meant preserving history, ensuring that the truth of Titanic included everyone, even the ones forgotten by the mainstream narrative. He contacted journalists, historians, and writers. His voice, aged but steady, recounted the journey across the Atlantic, the collision, and his actions during the chaos. He described the lifeboats, the freezing water, and the unrecorded heroism of those who survived through courage and quick thinking. A historical reckoning. When Joseph's story emerged, it caused ripples. Historians were astonished. The Titanic narrative, long dominated by stories of European men and women, now had a new dimension. The story of the only black men aboard whose intelligence, courage, and calm saved lives was finally acknowledged. Scholars revisited archives. Other forgotten names began to surface. Titanic was no longer a single story. It was a tapestry woven of diverse experiences, of quiet heroism, of survival against impossible odds. Joseph's testimony added depth, humanity, and a perspective previously absent in historical records. The personal reward on a personal level. Joseph found peace. He had carried decades of silence, but finally, he shared the truth. His children, now grown with families of their own, were able to understand the full extent of their father's bravery. They felt pride, awe, and gratitude. He did not seek accolades. He did not crave fame. The recognition was enough to ensure his actions would be remembered. That, he realized, was more valuable than any public honor. He had lived a long life filled with challenges, injustice, and triumphs. The Titanic was only one of the many tests he had endured and survived. The lasting legacy. Joseph Laroche's story reminds the world of several truths. Courage often manifests in quiet ways, without applause. Heroism does not require public recognition to matter. History, when incomplete, can erase extraordinary lives, but truth has a way of resurfacing. Survival is not merely physical, it is moral, emotional, and intellectual. Through his actions on the Titanic and his decision to speak decades later, Joseph ensured that future generations would remember not only the tragedy but also the courage of the forgotten. Silence transformed. In the end, silence became strength. By enduring decades of quiet, Joseph preserved the authenticity of his story. By breaking it at last, he transformed personal memory into collective history. The ocean that once threatened to erase his life now held a story that would live forever, a story of bravery, foresight, love, and unspoken heroism. The Titanic sank into history. Joseph's story surfaced into legend, and though he passed quietly, as he had lived, the ripples of his courage continue to touch every student, historian, and storyteller who learns of the man who survived the Titanic and waited 83 years to tell the world. If you found Joseph Laroche's story inspiring, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Silent Chains, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another untold story from history. Share this story with friends to honor the bravery that was long forgotten.